It's really my great pleasure to introduce the first speaker. And he's not known to the field of transplantation, but he'll be known to you on social media and the technology circles. And there are many ways to describe John. So I struggled to find one, but I write this that I think summarizes him best. He's a thinker entrenched in the world of technology, science, and medicine and innovation, who leads a think tank recognized globally for an inspired vision of transformation. No better one to start our session. So John, will digital transformation make or break the field? Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Take a look up. Take a look up. We are now not in an amphitheater. We're not in an auditorium. We're in a cathedral. A cathedral that is a testament to your success. A testament to the innovation in the world today. And a testament to, dare I say, disruption. Disruption is a very interesting word, and it comes at us both in sort of a functional, clinical, technological way, but it also comes at us in a philosophical way. And here we are in Greece. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit of a philosophical journey about digital transformation and what that means. And I want to start off with a provocative question, a very simple question. Is it okay to cheat? Is it okay to cheat? With the emergence of GPT and augmenting our skills, it becomes a very resonant question today. And I want to reference these two fine painters. Vermeer, we all know the girl with the pearl earring, Norman Rockwell. Both of these two artists leverage technology to advance their craft. Leverage technology to advance their craft. Vermeer used a device called a camera obscura to trace the image. Rockwell was much worse. He hired a photographer, took the picture, used a machine called a Lucy, and would enlarge it and trace it, almost like painting by numbers. Painting by numbers. Even his signature. Next time you look at a Norman Rockwell painting, take a look at his signature. It's a stencil. It's an actual stencil. And Rockwell said something very interesting. He said, "The Lucy is the worst machine I've ever heard of, and I'd be lost without it." That's where technology is impinging upon humanity, impinging upon clinical care. And it's a very uncomfortable philosophical dynamic that we're seeing come to life in the context of, let's say, GPT. And that transformation is often referred to as an exponential curve. The exponential curve, that sudden rapid rise up where the rate of change is extraordinarily quick. We've all talked about the exponential curve. It's one of the common terms that we use in a lot of our presentations today. But I'm here to tell you that that is being disrupted. We're even disrupting the disruptive curve in of itself, and we're looking at something that I would argue is called stacked change. The emergence of GPT and large language models today actually went straight up. What does it even mean, it goes straight up? Those of you who studied math and physics and science, you know, when you have a slope with a zero in the denominator, the equation blows up. Teachers would say you can't do that. Sometimes you say it actually goes to infinity. But that's what we're seeing here today. We're seeing stacked innovation. What does it mean? It means that, number one, exponential innovation is still here, but it's evolving very quickly. But we're seeing stacked innovation because what stacked innovation is innovation to the power of innovation, innovation on top of innovation. It's computers and AI driving the insights to push transformation. It's a powerful spot, but it's very philosophically precarious. And where that puts us today is at a threshold of a fundamental transformation. I like to think of it as the next big bang. We're seeing the emergence of data, insights, technology that are transforming not only the practice of medicine and transplant, but also humanity itself. And let's take a little bit of a look at that. You know, we started off with things like the steam engine and the mechanical advantage. Back in the day, the most efficient animal in the world based upon oxygen utilization and capacity, MVO2, if we want to go down that science road, was the cheetah. The cheetah was the most efficient. And then all of a sudden, we had this thing called the bicycle. The bicycle offered us what? A mechanical advantage. And what we're moving today is beyond a mechanical advantage, beyond electricity, beyond the binary computer, beyond even the digital era. You know, we talk a lot about digitization in clinical medicine. If we can digitize our records, we can transform. But interestingly, we're moving beyond that. We're getting ahead of digitization, and we're moving into a new era that I would argue is actually the fifth industrial revolution, What is that? Let's take maybe a little closer look at that. It's the cognitive age. Today, AI and technology is optimizing our personal and shared cognitive component with artificial intelligence. I want to draw your attention to the top quadrant in blue. And there's a very interesting phrase there that I think captures, again, from a philosophical perspective, what the heck is going on? Technology, humans and machines will dance together metaphorically. That's the nature of clinical practice. That's the nature of self-care, patient-centric care, where technology will work with humanity in a unique combination. It's the cognitive age. It's the cognitive age. And if you think a little bit about applications such as GPT, ChatGPT, large language models, what we see is that that is a cognitive tool, a cognitive aid that facilitates an enhancement in the way we think. Now, that pushes us across a threshold. It pushes us across a cognitive threshold, and I want you to take notice of the shape of the curve first. The shape of the curve, if you look at speech recognition, reading comprehension, we begin to see this transformation from that exponential curve to that freaky stacked exponential curve where it goes straight up. But perhaps more importantly, what we're seeing today is that technology is advancing beyond that level of human capability. Who's the smartest person in the room? Ask my mom that question. She says, it's the doctor. Right? I mean, that's sort of the standard question and the standard answer. But we're beginning to challenge that dynamic, going back to our core theme today of disruption, where the smartest person in the room very well may be technology in some construct. But it's not only just moving across speech recognition and handwriting recognition and language understanding. We're actually see a shift into the clinical sphere. So we're moving into the clinical threshold where technology models, large language models that are trained with medical information, that's what the pink bar is actually showing a superior outcome. So we're actually getting to the point where technology is driving, pushing, or even pulling humanity into a new perspective. Now, what does empathy have to do with this? About 3 weeks ago or so, there was an article published that looked at GPT and computer models being more empathetic than a clinician. It got a lot of news. I think it's a very interesting observation. This chart shows you some of the responses and compared to human models. I don't think it's real. I think it's probably a contrived reality, largely a function of the nature of the job. If I'm an emergency room physician, or if I'm busy, or if my mom goes to her doctor and she starts asking her questions to the doctor, she usually answers kind of quickly, "Oh, Rose, you're fine. Take your medicine, you'll be okay." That's that 3, 4, 5, 6-word answer. But what GPT is giving patients is this notion of a longer, more complex, more humanistic answer. How does that fit in? How does that fit into the dynamic? In fact, when we think of GPT, how does that even fit into the engagement that we have with patients? Anybody who's ever given out a pharmaceutical tear sheet on an immunosuppressant drug, an antihypertensive drug, any kind of a drug, those pieces of paper are written for a 5th grader. That's the rule. We have to write it to a common denominator based around 5th grade education so that everyone understands it. The interesting thing is no one understands it because the busy mom doesn't really understand it in the context of her life. The electrical engineer who's 60 years old, who understands p-values and bar charts, has to read something that's written for a 5th grader. So what we're seeing is that GPT is moving us in a direction where technology allows us to create information that is very relevant to our patient populations. Now, the interesting thing is that while we talk a lot about technology, the intrusion of technology into our world is really quite small. We look at the use of GPT in particular is about 80-90% of people who do not use it. So we get a lot of information about GPT, technological innovation, and pushing it into clinical practice. But the reality is that it's really not moving as quickly as some people might think it is. But here's an interesting thing. These big mainframes, these big large language models are actually getting smaller. They're getting smaller to the point where they can fit in your pocket. The future of these large language models will be an essential tool for business, for clinical practice. They'll be adaptable, and they'll be built around your particular knowledge, your corpus of innovation. So the future of LLMs, if you want to disrupt the game, will be that a particular hospital or a particular ICU or a particular transplant unit will take their data, combine it with a large language model, and that data lives on your computer. It's your private and personal data. And the role of LLMs will only continue to expand in the world today. So I want to talk about how this gets done. Because a good idea is only as good as its use in clinical practice. And oftentimes we see that ideas, well, they may get published, they may get notoriety, but it doesn't quite get used in clinical medicine. And what we're seeing today is this endless sea of information, clinical trials, drug interactions, all sorts of clinical domains that are coming at the clinician today that is faster than their ability to assimilate that into the world. In other words, the human brain's ability to assimilate information is fixed, but the information that's coming at us is growing and growing and growing. So what do? Technology is really the only path forward to try to master this and put it into some coherent fashion where we can understand it and work with it. Now, those of you who've been involved in sort of exponential innovation, the inculcation of, let's say, genetic analysis, or even a digital stethoscope, or a handheld echo that's looking at an AV fistula or a surgical procedure. The early part of that curve is very, very tricky. I call it the danger zone because we live in a linear world. Even though we're talking about exponential change and stacked change, we basically kind of live in a linear world. We like to know that we get 10% interest on our retirement funds year after year, 12%, 6%, whatever it may be, because we could plot the curve. And we can say when we retire, this is what we'll have. We tend to look at things in a linear world, especially from a business and adoption perspective. But when we look at exponential curve, here's the interesting point. And as we move into new types of technology, new adoptions, new disruptions, the early part of that curve is under linear growth. So we say to ourselves, this might not be working. Our boss, the chief of medicine, comes and says, well, that new methodology that you're using is really not quite up to snuff when we compare it to the old way we did it, the linear way. So that's just one observation that's very, very important. Linear growth makes us feel good. Exponential growth changes the world. Now, AT&T, telephone carrier in the United States, did a very interesting survey of healthcare technology executives. And they asked them, why isn't technology getting adopted in your organization? I thought this was fascinating. It wasn't a lack of expertise. I hear that excuse all the time. Well, we don't have anybody who really understands that. It wasn't the viability of a long-term investment. In other words, it wasn't the money. It wasn't the ROI in many instances. What it was a lack of a unified strategy. So the interesting thing about disruption, and one of my takeaways today, is that disruption is strategic. Disruption is not arbitrary. It's a plan. And what we find is that a lack of a unified strategy, whether it be in a business or in a transplant unit or in a hospital or in a complex medical center, if there's no plan, it doesn't get done. That's a very, very important insight into the world we live in today. And the interesting thing about that is culture will destroy innovation. Culture is the backside of disruption. Think about that for a second. If I have a clinical procedure, if I have I'm going to use a new device to measure blood oxygen levels or something like that. If it's not embraced by the interns or the residents, if the nurses don't want to do it, it's very hard to get that adopted. Culture squashes innovation. So it's not just the chief of medicine, the transplant surgeon, articulating transformation from Mount Olympus. It's not the way it goes. Innovation is often top-down, but it's also bottom-up. And we have to inculcate into our colleagues a sense of innovation. Here's the secret. That sense of innovation is not often imparted by learning what 1,6 fructose diphosphate is. It's using devices and opportunities that share an intellectual or emotional border. What do I mean by that? Go for a ride in a driverless car and feel the innovation. Feel the power of technology as you sit in that car and it drives you to where you're going, to the airport. Those are the emotional touch points that help drive innovation, that give the rank and file, the doctors, the nurses, the interns, the medical students, the caregivers, a sense of where innovation is going. Now, the interesting thing is, just because you have a good idea, and we all have good ideas, it doesn't mean that they're going to work. It doesn't mean they're going to fit into our clinical pattern, our clinical hierarchy. And this is a great story. Half of it is sort of true, half of it is a bit of a myth, but it still works. Remember the good old-fashioned typewriter? The keys and the little things that would come up and hit the paper back in the old days? The story is that the QWERTY, the QWERTY keyboard, was designed to slow you down because the keys stuck. But in 1931, a guy named Dvorak invented a new keyboard, ergonomically designed, and it was a miserable failure. It was a miserable failure. You can go to Amazon and download the keyboard if you'd like to try it. It failed for two reasons, and this is very, very aligned with medicine. Number one, it was a capital expense. I couldn't afford in 1931 a brand new typewriter. Those were expensive. More importantly, I had to learn a new typing methodology. A new typing methodology. Here's the key insight about medicine that typist told Dvorak. Now, it's the same line that every clinician says to every innovative dynamic in the world. That typist said, well, it's not the way I learned it. It's not the way I was trained. And that is one of the biggest impediments to transformation in the world today. It's not the way I was trained. Boy, if there ever was a more resonant phrase that pushes against disruption and innovation, it's that. So the Dvorak keyboard was a great idea. Too expensive, and people would not learn a new typing modality for practical reasons, because learning a whole new keystroke to give you 10 or 15% more speed wasn't really functional. And the interesting thing about innovation, I want to talk about COVID here. A guy named Stephen Jay Gould, a professor at Harvard, said that innovation happens in discrete quanta or packets. He called it punctuated equilibrium. He said that nothing happens, nothing happens, nothing happens, nothing happens, and then an asteroid hits the Earth and the dinosaurs die. That's the nature of innovation. It's that sudden change. And we all talk about COVID as that asteroid that hit the Earth. I'm here to tell you that it's not COVID. It's AI. COVID, okay, it was a tragedy. It pushed care to new dimensions. It activated telemedicine. Except if you look at the data, a lot of telemedicine visits are back down to the 2020 baseline. So my point is that AI and technological innovation, particularly through the emergence of things like ChatGPT and large language models, is the asteroid. It is the punctuated equilibrium that's going to change the game. And no matter what happens, all of these innovations, like our first innovation, which I would argue is fire, comes with it a corresponding duality of wonder and fear. Wonder and fear. Fire would let us stay up, let us migrate, let us move, let us eat protein to grow our brain, but it will also be a weapon. And today, fire is still the single biggest leading cause of property destruction in the world. So the bigger the innovation, the bigger the fear. They're not mitigated, they go hand in hand. We still have a respectable, honest fear of fire, and that's where we are with AI today. AI is the biggest innovation in the history of humanity. And it will, along with it, have probably the largest fear. And ultimately what that means for us is that IQ is important. In the medical profession, that's the standard. You gotta be smart. About 25 years ago, EQ kind of emerged that we have to be compassionate and empathic to our patients. But I would say today, it's your TQ, your technology quotient that allows you to achieve new levels of success. It's an independent arbiter of your success outside of both IQ and EQ. And what ultimately this means is that AI will be at the center of care, where data will come in on one side and value will come out the other. And that value will tip the scales in a positive way. The loss of jobs, the lack of touch, the humanity, those will not stand against the advantages of efficiency, decreased workload, physician burnout, money, the economic implications. Tomorrow morning, we're going to have a real interesting talk about you and AI and some very, very interesting observations there. So I want to finish up by going back to that Dvorak keyboard and going back to that phrase that I hear from clinicians day in and day out. It's not the way I was trained. I'm not going to put in that A line that way. I don't put a CVP line on. I'm look for a nodule in a lung. I'm going to use a CT scan because that's the way I was trained. Tomorrow's world that begins today is captured by this quote by Alvin Toffler, who wrote the book Future Shock. The future illiterate will not be those who can't read and write. That's the wrong modality. The future illiterate is essentially those who cannot unlearn and relearn. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, John, for this fascinating and thought-provoking talk on what the future of healthcare will look like and some of the challenges we may face along the way. These technologies could reshape our interaction with patients and may be an important asset to further develop our realistic care and shared decision-making vision.